Welcome to the Monster Guys podcast, the podcast that follows two best-selling authors, storytellers, and all-around really awesome guys as they travel to locations near and far to unravel the mysteries of the monsters, the legends, and lore that have kept people captivated since the beginning of time and beyond. You can learn more about their books, upcoming events and appearances, find show notes, and catch up on past episodes at themonsterguys.com. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a positive review on iTunes and display your undying love and devotion to the Monster Guys by joining the Monster Guys Network on Patreon. That's patreon.com/The Monster Guys. For just $1 a month, you can rock their world, and that's a pretty cool thing to do. Thanks. Now, here's DC and C. Michael McGannon, your friends and hosts for this episode of the Monster Guys podcast.
And a happy new year, everyone. Welcome to the Monster Guys podcast. Thank you so much for listening, hanging out with us here. My name is DC McGannon. As always, I'm joined by my partner and co-conspirator in all things creative, C. Michael McGannon.
Hello, everyone.
Michael, we are officially in 2017.
That we are, and there are already things outside the window making noises at us.
I don't know what that is, but we might have to go investigate, especially after this episode.
I'm okay staying inside.
Yeah, so before we go any further into 2017, I think it's important that we touch a little bit on at least the end of 2016. As everybody knows, last year was just a crazy year in terms of loss, in terms of chaos in the world and upheaval. One of the last things that happened was that we lost Princess Leia.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are very, very sad about that. Of course, we lost a lot of other great celebrities, people that we look up to and have entertained us through the course of our lives. And a lot of people have experienced personal loss. But this one kind of hit home and capped a lot of that off. If it weren't for people like Carrie Fisher and her era of creatives, a lot of us probably wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now in a lot of ways.
No, she was, I think a lot of us will miss her strong, outspoken, and sarcastically funny spirit, and her ability to really be honest with everybody around her and be completely transparent.
Yeah, I agree. So, you know what? We raise our own lightsabers to the memory of Carrie Fisher. Of course, very tragic for that family as they also lost her mother just a couple days later. So our thoughts and prayers to the family there. And I've seen all over the U.S. at least, and maybe the world, people have had these gatherings where they've raised their lightsabers, and I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
In memory. So we do that as well in memory of Carrie Fisher, our princess, everybody's princess. Something else that has recently happened, kind of in monster news, a little bit more entertainment side of things, is that Guillermo del Toro, has released his animated Troll Hunters on Netflix.
Finally, and it's good.
Yeah, we've been watching that. That is some top shelf entertainment. Great animation, great story, and it really brings in a lot of elements of monsters and magic, mythology, and folklore into the story. You know, and a lot of times people do this kind of thing and they kind of mix it up or make up their own. He's kind of stayed true to a lot while putting it into a modern setting.
He has, and it's very much Del Toro. It's very bright and fanciful and still at the same time dark and twisted. And it still fits the age group that it's made for, and I think age groups above that very much enjoy it as well. He definitely has brought in some new and very Del Toro ideas and concepts. I think something that cracked us all up was seeing what was underneath the Noma hat.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was, I think we all just kind of laughed ourselves off the couch at that point, but it's very good. Seeing as how trolls was always an interesting topic for us, anybody that enjoyed those episodes, I'd say go check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I've enjoyed the whole aspect of the trolls and seeing what's happening in the underworld the troll market, just the different types and variations of his characters and their abilities. It's like you said, very true to Del Toro. It's very true to folklore and mythology, and it's a very exciting show. It's got, I think, some 26 or 27 episodes in this first season, which is titled as Part 1. However, I think what people should understand is that those episodes are really short. They're not like super short, but they're shorter than normal, so you get through them quickly. Yeah. And that story moves at a very rapid pace.
It really does. The transitions from some scenes kind of surprised me because of how fast they were, and I don't know, it was kind of refreshing. So from just a storyteller standpoint, I enjoy watching the decisions they've made with the script writing.
Yeah, I agree. So we would highly recommend Troll Hunters on Netflix right now. We do not get paid for that, by the way. It's just something that we have enjoyed watching from the world of monsters and from a mind like Del Toro that we enjoy his creations along the way, and he's just got a fantastic animated feature going on here.
He really does. And I guess the one last thing I would say is it has a tie into Merlin, and I really want to know what that is.
Yeah, that is interesting how that's playing out. So
we'll see.
I was a little bit surprised at the first reference I heard, and then you're right. We'll see where it goes. We haven't unraveled that mystery altogether. So, Michael, today we have, in my opinion, just a fantastic interview. Troy Hudson is with us on the show today. Troy is a Bigfoot Sasquatch researcher. He's in the field almost every week of the year throughout the Midwest. He's speaking to a lot of groups of people about not just the legend and the lore, but the science of Bigfoot and Sasquatch. He's a tribal liaison between Native American tribes here in the U.S. and the scientific community, which I think is very interesting. In the midst of all that, he's a very laid-back, very nice and pleasant individual to talk to.
He is. We spoke with him before the interview, and he was extremely easy to talk to and very knowledgeable and very kind. If I could add something real quick, I've never really been that interested in Bigfoot, but after hearing...
Shame on you, Michael. You admit that publicly.
I do. It just... He's never been that fascinating to me, but after talking to Troy, I have to say I'm hooked.
Yeah, definitely. If you are a Bigfoot fan, you're going to love this interview. If you're not so much into Bigfoot, I'm going to say go ahead and listen because it kind of might blow your mind.
It blew my mind.
In several ways. And I will say this about the interview. We don't approach this as just another, hey, look, there's a Bigfoot sighting. Is it real or is it not? We actually talk some science. We talk history. We talk Native American legends and stories. We talk personal experience. We talk all kinds of angles about this. So it's a very interesting conversation. And I will say up front, Michael, I believe it's our responsibility to ask the questions, specifically with regards to a topic as sensitive and controversial as Bigfoot. We kind of found some connections on different levels. And I'll just go ahead and say it, perhaps theological or biblical, even. We open up a couple of boxes that may not traditionally be associated with Bigfoot per se.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
Yeah, and here's the thing. A lot of people are going to disagree. A lot of people may find it just outright controversial. Some may even consider it blasphemous. I don't know. We dip into a couple of topics specifically toward the end of our conversation, like I said, that are not typically associated with this topic and with this study. And some of the things that Troy brought up, particularly in our pre-conversation to the interview, for me connected the dots back to another trend of conversation that I see happening right now in the world, specifically on a spiritual level, specifically on a theological level. Again, you may or may not agree with it, you may or may not like it, but there was some conversation that connected to other conversations that I'm hearing out there with regards to some other controversial subjects, and I wanted to ask the question. I wanted to see where it went. Now, we may just open the box with this. People may come running for us, Michael. I don't know. We may find some friends in the midst of all this. I don't know. I think it would be interesting for all of us, you, me, Troy, our listeners, all of us to continue this conversation and see where that box leads to, because it is fascinating. No matter whether you come from it from a realistic, this is real perspective, or a mythological perspective, it's really interesting conversation.
If nothing else, the implications that Troy's answers to our questions raise are ridiculously, I don't even have words for it, with some aspects to folklore and mythology around the world. Like I said, my mind was blown. That really doesn't even, I mean, you saw me. I was probably walking around for a couple hours afterwards, just
you and I actually took a drive that night. We went out for a cup of coffee, sat down, talked about it. We walked around, talked about it, and I think what you're trying to say, the implications of some of those answers with regards and reference to other myths and legends and monsters and creatures of lore make some really drastic connections.
You said just recently, like today, that it connected a lot of dots. Something that I had said after talking with Troy was that for me it connected too many dots. And I don't know, I think people out there just need to listen in here.
And to be fair, for every dot it may have connected, it raised two more questions. Mm-hmm. So this conversation is not over. Troy has invited us on a private excursion and a couple of investigations, real investigations for people in our area and a couple of other areas throughout the Midwest that have requested his assistance in kind of uncovering some mysteries that are taking place in their own areas. And I find it just fascinating that in the midst of this conversation, we kind of transition from talking about a monster of legend to a race of people. I caught myself, and it was just really weird to hear that coming out of my mouth. So regardless of where you come from on this topic, this is fascinating stuff. We're excited to talk to Troy. We're excited to bring this interview to you. Continue the conversation with us. But for now, let's switch over. Let's talk to Troy Hudson about Bigfoot. Michael, we are here with Troy Hudson. Troy, we'd like to welcome you to the Monster Guys podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty good, sir. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Just a little bit about you. You have been dealing with Bigfoot and Sasquatch studies and expeditions for a number of years. You're actually involved with the Sasquatch Genome Project, which has been conducting physical analysis of suspected Bigfoot DNA since 2006. I believe you're also the Tribal Liaison for the Sasquatch Genome Project, kind of a bridge between those communities. What else can you tell us about yourself? Give us an introduction about you, what you do, where you're coming from, specifically in regards to Bigfoot research, Sasquatch research.
Well, I'm born and raised in southeast Oklahoma. Grew up in a small town that was pretty much comprised of you were either white or you were Native American, you were Indian. The town was pretty much in a situation where it was strictly the coal mines, so there was a lot of industry there, and it had passed. When I graduated high school, there really wasn't much. Went into the Navy and went overseas, got to see the world, came back to Oklahoma. I heard a lot of stories growing up, but didn't really pay much attention to it. Boy Scout camping trip, we had some stuff happen there. We had somebody walk around the camp, and we heard some knocking, which one of the scoutmasters had made a claim that it was just an old man that lived up on the mountain chopping wood. Well, he chopped wood all day and all night long because the knocking went on forever. Well, long story short, we had an encounter. Another Boy Scout and myself in the nighttime. Didn't think much of it other than we thought it was maybe one of those scoutmasters in the woods. Well, when we got home, my mother had said that actually a lady was on the news said that she had saw a Bigfoot across her backyard, and she lived only a few miles outside of the Boy Scout camp where we lived. So we kind of made a connection. My friends and I thought, well, maybe that's what we saw in the woods. Didn't really see it. We're like, well, didn't really go on much about it. Moved down to Dallas and worked for the government, and I had a gentleman, one of the other agents, come into my office and asked me if I had ever seen a Bigfoot because he knew I was from Oklahoma. And I didn't really know what he was talking about. And he said, hey, there's an organization that does a expedition in southeast Oklahoma. Well, I looked on the website. I knew right where that was at. not too far from where I went to the Boy Scout camp. I attended the expedition. The curator knew that I had a background in law enforcement, which, of course, you have an investigative experience, talking to people, investigating crimes, incidents. Well, I knew a lot of the area there, and I knew a lot of the sounds. I come to find out I knew a little bit more about the topic than I thought I knew. But the curator asked me if I was going to like to be one of the investigators in the Oklahoma area. In those days, it was the BFRO, Bigfoot Research Organization, and they didn't have anybody in the Texas-Oklahoma area. So from about 2005 to 2009, I operated the Bigfoot expeditions for the BFRO in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas, as well as conducting investigations in those states. Left the BFRO, kind of started my own thing. I was also connected to the Bigfoot conference in Honobia. I wasn't involved in the conference per se. I was pretty much helping the caretakers of the property and some of the other organizers with odd-end jobs. Well, that organization kind of fell through I wouldn't say fell through. They pretty much had I guess a termination of their contract with the organization that was hosting the Bigfoot conference in Honobia, and one of the organizers of that with the Chamber of Commerce asked me if I would take it over since of my background, and I knew the local history and I knew the topic very well, so that's how I got involved in organizing the Bigfoot conference in Honobia. That was about 2010. At the same time, I got involved with the Sasquatch Genome Project, met Dr. Melba Ketchum, and that pretty much flourished into working with her, helping her with field investigations when she would get a lot of calls or contacts about activity that was in the local area, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. The Tribal Liaison position basically came out of my background, my knowledge of a lot of the tribes in Oklahoma with a lot of the contacts that I had built over the years. Basically, what I do is educate the public there is a history with Native American folklore. At the same time, there is a lot of sightings, a lot of activity that are connected in or around tribal communities, reservations, and tribal land. With my knowledge and my background of tribal customs and beliefs, and my knowledge of field experience and working in the Sasquatch Genome Project, pretty much like that was, like I said, it was building that gap and that bridge between what the science says and what the Native American communities also say in their folklore and their oral history.
And I think it's important to point out right there that being a bridge between those two communities, there is, in fact, scientific research being done on Sasquatch and on the Bigfoot, or what some call, I think even you call, the tall people or the tall ones. There's actual scientific research being done, as well as the oral history and traditions of the native people throughout the country and throughout North America, actually all around the world, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So we're not just dealing with a bunch of stories and fuzzy pictures and hoaxers. We're dealing with some hard science here, and we want to get into some of that in a little bit. But before we go much further, what do we call this? Because a lot of people call it Bigfoot. A lot of people call it Sasquatch. I've heard other names. Is there an official term or a preference among those doing the research and fields of study to call it one thing or the other, and why?
And if I could add something, when we talked last night before the interview, you had called them by a specific name that kind of piqued our interests, that really lines up with some other folklore, and at the same time is kind of separate from that. So if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that in the midst of DC's question.
Yeah, actually, it depends on what part of the country you're from or you're visiting, and what part of the world you're visiting. Around the country in North America, you have the First Nations people, and then you have all the tribes in North America below the Canadian-American border. And then you have a lot of tribal villages and tribal communities in South Central America. They all have a name for them. They all have a different name. You know, you have your country. You have the Chinese call them the Yuran, which translates as wild man. Australia, you have the Yowie. Even in India and Bangladesh, you had the Mandi Barud and the Ren Pendek in Indonesia. Of course, everybody's heard the Yeti. That's in the mountains of Nepal. I think they refer to him as a snowman. Here in North America, almost every native tribe has their name and the translation of that name. And it either translates as tall man, wild man. The Iroquois Indian, Iroquois and Seneca, they refer to him as stone giant. The big man, referred to by the Oglala or Lakota Sioux people. The Hopa Indian, referred to him as boss of the woods. In the Choctaw language, because my background comes from Choctaw on my mother's side, the Choctaw language is actually prominent in Oklahoma because Oklahoma is a Choctaw word. It means red man. Okla means people, and Homa means red. And over the years, hearing it and seeing what the DNA is indicating that they are, with the other DNA projects scattered around the world, and they're all coming up with the same answers as the Texas DNA project. It only fitted that listening to the tribal elders explain to them as a people, another tribe. In my mind, and in my little circle of friends and everybody, we don't really refer to them as Bigfoot. We just refer to them as those guys over there, or the big people. In the Choctaw language, Chicto means big. So in a reference in a lot of literature that I write on my blog and speaking to other tribal elders, Okla Chicto means the big people. And I just refer to them in a more respectful way. Bigfoot is a common term. Sasquatch is a common term. Actually, Sasquatch is an Indian word. It's the First Nation. I don't know how you pronounce the tribe, Salish tribe. Sasquatch being wild man. They're, I think, in British Columbia, Southwest British Columbia, if I remember right. So Sasquatch actually is an Indian name. I would refer to that maybe, speaking in public, the word Bigfoot Sasquatch is commonly known. I don't know, if you were a person that we did not know and we were to refer to you as an appendix of your body, I don't know how respectful you would take that. So,
right, makes
try
sense.
to try to get away from saying Bigfoot is kind of hard, because sometimes when you're referring to, when you meet people, like when I do a presentation in a community that has Bigfoot activity, but they're just not up on the latest, information about Bigfoot because they might not, really have the internet, or they're just not really into all the phrase words and kick words. You have to use the word Bigfoot so everybody is on the same page.
Yeah, a common language principle there. And there's actually a scientific name that has been applied for and registered, if I'm not mistaken. You sent me some information. The Homo sapiens cognatus, Latin.
Blood relative.
Right. The Latin meaning blood relative. And that's a name that is actually registered within the scientific community, if I'm not mistaken, that refers to this species as a species of people, the Sasquatch people. So it kind of gave us a pretty big leap scientifically in referencing that group of people.
It does, and that's where a lot of people, especially in the scientific community, and I'm speaking broad. I'm not pointing out one scientific community or one individual, or just I'm speaking as a whole. When you give them that name, and when you look at the science, and like I said, there's other projects. At this moment, I don't think I have the written permission to speak about their process or their findings, but I do know that there's other projects in other countries going on, and they have came to similar conclusions that this project, the Sasquatch Genome Project, has. And when you look at the DNA, according to your translation of science into where we can understand it, layman's terms, it basically reveals that they are a blood relative, because DNA suggests that the maternal lineage of their DNA has human in it. And their parents are unknown. So if you're referring to something that's upright, greater than 8 feet tall, in excess of 800 pounds, that's extremely elusive, that has enormous strength, and it has certain abilities that some people don't want to talk about, unable to comprehend, and you're saying that they're a blood relative, you might find a lot of people that are not going to go with that, just not going to accept that.
Yeah, and let's just clarify something you just said, and we'll get into this a little deeper later, I think, but in the DNA studies and the research that's being done on the maternal side, you say that there's human DNA that's been introduced. On the paternal side, it's unknown. Did I hear you say that correctly?
Yes.
And that is probably some of the most fascinating statements I've heard on the study of the Sasquatch to date. That there is actual DNA evidence that is documented, that is traceable, whatever you want to call it, but this study is being done. This is beyond just fuzzy pictures and questionable video. This is deep scientific research being done on what some people would term a creature, some people term a group of people. I've even heard it being termed that this is a whole tribe of people, another native tribe to this land.
And it goes even further than that, because in Dr. Ketchum's project, she's had the opportunity to look at a lot of different care and look at a lot of different samples. And she and I've had, I can't tell you how many conversations on the phone over the different types of things. And in my research with the sightings and field investigations, her experience and her the scientific findings and the scientific research, she can pretty much tell you that everything around the world has a relationship with each other, but the problem is they're not all the same. For instance, I know, and there's other projects that has found similar findings that, you talked about your skunk apes or Florida and the boogaroos, what they call them in Louisiana. People refer to them as a Bigfoot. Well, supposedly, scientifically, they are not the same. They're genetically different. So you're opening up a can of worms that just has a bottomless pit. Everything overseas, even her project, she was on a TV show, Destination Truth, when she first was involved in that, when she started getting that Yeti hair, even her conversation to me that the Yeti is different than our North American Bigfoot, even though they look the same. They're upright, they're tall, they're hairy. So, you have the physical similarities, but genetically, there's a lot of differences there.
You kind of answered the question I was about to ask next, but going a little further into that, there are other, I don't know if you want to call them tribes, of similar creatures that differ even in height. So, a lot of people would know this as Bigfoot, but there are some tribes that are described as dwarves almost, very small humanoids that are still ape-like and very hairy, very strong, very similar to the Sasquatch or the Bigfoot, but smaller than your average human. Are those connected? Are those anything that you would consider in the same race of creatures, or are they something completely different?
In my opinion, you are correct. In Japan, they call them the Hidabon, and they're a smaller version of our Bigfoot. They're in the mountains of northern Japan. I actually had a friend while I was in the government, more and more involved in this this was a hobby. In the beginning, it was just a hobby. So more and more, I had one guy that was in an office in the same complex where I was working, and he was in the Marine Corps, and he lived in Japan, and he was married to a Japanese national. Well, he and I got talking, and all of a sudden, he calls me a couple days later and said his wife's father knew of Hidabon sightings in northern Japan. So that's how I got to learn a little bit more about the Japanese birds. Almost the same type of behavior. They like to throw rocks, they scream, they whistle, they walk upright, but the only difference is they're much shorter. They're typically 5 to 4 feet tall. You have some people refer to them as cryptids. You have other folklore and legends. I think the Bigfoot version of the Pakistan, the Barnanu, or I think that's how you pronounce it, they're a smaller version, but they're hairy, they're tall, they walk on 2 legs. So there's not much scientific evidence from those countries. I do know China, the government actually funds, and they do their own DNA. They do their own government project that is financed through their government. So
yeah, I think in China, is it the urine or the urine? I think it was in China that they refer to as the Bigfoot.
Yes.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I've actually reached out to a group that specializes or focuses a study on the Chinese Sasquatch. If I'm not mistaken, China actually has sectioned off and considers it a national park, but is inaccessible to the general public, a huge landmass that is protected because they believe entire tribes of these urine or these Sasquatches live there. So they actually section it off, don't allow access to it except for government studies, and protect that land and protect those tribes over there. So they're pretty hardcore, pretty serious about the topic of Sasquatch and Bigfoot in China, to the extent that at a government level, they're protecting land in order to protect that species.
And you're correct. If you go outside of the United States, most countries are pretty open in a sense. North America, the United States is just a melting pot of so many nationalities, so many diverse people that live in North America. North America is kind of its own division of different societies because of our melting pot of everybody that lives in the United States. But you go to other countries and how they feel and how they think is a little bit different than how we are. Like China, they're a little bit more open about it. Their government is open about it. You have Australia, and, talking about the yowie in Australia is how we talk about, wild hogs here. We just don't, the mindset here in North America and the United States is just not, I don't know if it's because of the privacy thing that everybody feels because of what's going on in our society over the years. Everybody's so afraid to offend somebody, and everybody's sensitive about everybody else saying something. I don't know. I have no idea. But
yeah,
it just a little more open about it.
Yeah, and it seems like we're consumed with the idea of conspiracy here too. Whether it be, I'm not trying to lump these species into the same box, but if you talk about Sasquatch or you talk about aliens or you talk about fairies or you talk about the Wampus Cat, everybody, it's just immediate conspiracy, or it's just immediate write-off that that's just a bunch of stories. And I think there's some of that where it could be true, but, particularly with Bigfoot, particularly with Sasquatch, it seems that there's enough documented evidence to raise the right eyebrows, to ask the right questions, and do some serious insight. And furthermore, I'm of the opinion that we haven't listened to our Native Americans, our tribes, and our elders very well in the past, and we've paid the price for that. They've got a lot to say about this, and I'm of the opinion that maybe we should listen a little closer to these leaders and to these tribes and these peoples about stories such as this, especially with the amount of evidence that's out there that suggests that we're dealing with something that's very real and not just a story and not just a conspiracy. I wonder also how much Hollywood has to play with, if you will, quote unquote, the cover-up of all of this.
Well, actually, I was involved in a potential show back in 2010, and I learned quite a bit. So I can actually talk a little bit about Hollywood because I've actually experienced it with this topic. You have, the show was based on Native American culture, Native American folklore. We went to northern Oklahoma at a reservation, and they had experienced Bigfoot researchers before because of some sightings. Most Bigfoot research organizations sometimes are just made up of volunteers that don't really have too much of an investigator background. They may be lawyers, school teachers, coaches, real estate agents. I mean, they could come from all kinds of background. Well, sometimes the excitement gets better of them. So a lot of Bigfoot research organizations are not welcomed in a lot of areas because they don't follow certain protocols or certain customs on going on to tribal land or to meeting tribal elders. Some do, but most usually don't, because I find out later that the organization was there prior to my arrival and they were kicked off. So the show with Hollywood, pretty much Hollywood, in my experience, they want the stuff that's going to keep the show going. Well, you would think that they want the real deal. They want the science. They want the pictures. They want the video. If you already have the videos that were taken in an investigative approach and they can be proven under a microscope that they're not altered, they're not shaved, the pictures or the videos not shaved, or you had something introduced in the video and it's a live, full-blown, real video of a Sasquatch. Now you have DNA, but yet it receives no interest because the show is basically going to show you the proof of Bigfoot. Your team on the show is going to be working well with each other, laughing and hanging out and being professional and know, they're pretty much as a well-oiled team, but then all of a sudden they don't want that because they want somebody in there in that group that's going to be a naysayer or a skeptic to bring the other side. Well, that's good. The problem was, in our situation, was all the naysayer stereotype non-believers became believers on our expeditions when we went out to do filming. So it didn't work out well.
It doesn't help the ratings, does it?
It didn't help the ratings. Another one, too, was in, no names being mentioned, but, they were looking at the Native American side of it and said, this is good Hollywood, but we need to find people that look Indian because some of you look Indian. And I thought, well, that doesn't really hang well, because that means you have somebody that's going to play a part. Well, how are they going to say what I know, and how are they going to say it on camera with the passion and the knowledge of that person that's actually having that? So there was a lot of because you don't look Native American, you don't fit the bill. We can't do it. Yeah, there was a couple other people in our group that were, they have a SUVI card and they just didn't look enough. They wanted somebody that had that Hollywood Indian look. They're like, well, this isn't a 1970s Western. I'm trying to get somebody to play that part. So,
wow, that's crazy.
Well, and the more it went on, was introduced to other producers, introduced to other people. And on the phone, you can hear it in their voices that they were not concerned. They were not interested in the field work, getting out there and staying the night and hearing the sounds, recording. And they wanted turmoil in the show. They wanted controversy. They wanted two people to argue. They wanted something that would spice it up. I'm like, well, in my opinion, the show that everybody wants to see is the stuff which showing real evidence, showing real proof, and obtaining it. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, it seems that
Maybe we were backwards in it.
Yeah, it seems that Hollywood isn't so much interested in DNA evidence or facts or long drawn-out research and the due process, but, interested in controversy and argument and a cliffhanger to get to the next commercial. So let's segment this thing and make sure it fits within the 30-minute time frame and we get our commercials in. And oh, by the way, you need to look like a Native American.
Well, that was the experience that I went through. We had a pretty good lineup of what the show was going to be and how it was going to, formulate into being towards the final season of showing where all this was going to end up and showing the proof. Even with the DNA, the individual Adrian Erickson, even in his project, he had the videos from a Kentucky project. You have the DNA and the physical science, but then you have videos go along with it. Matter of fact, it even goes further. One of the Bigfoots in the video that was at the property where these people lived in Kentucky, there was a DNA sample from that. So basically, Dr. Ketchum had the proof that existed on video in the physical science. You actually could touch it with your hand and prove that one existed by the DNA. Well, in 2013, we had a news conference in Dallas, Texas, and a lot of local news channels came in and set up. We did a presentation, the DNA presentation, did the videos, but you can pretty much see this is 2016. You didn't really know anything about it until I mentioned it to you, didn't you?
No, I hadn't heard a thing about it until you told us about it.
Right. Well, I've been on a few town hall meetings across the state of Oklahoma, going and giving presentations and lectures and stuff, and then I asked the same thing. Most of them, none of them know anything about it. Well, that tells you right there how far that news conference went. It probably lasted a couple of weeks and hit the internet, went around the world. Everybody went, yeah, okay, and lost interest.
Well, when searching for some of the stuff tonight, I found your organization pretty quickly, and I found actually an article on some of the work you guys did in Hawaii, but without prior knowledge, I can see very easily how you would never find that.
Most people that come on our expedition, it's an interest, it's a passion. A lot of people they have to have everything Bigfoot. They live, sleep, eat, nothing but Bigfoot. And they have their job, they go to work. At the end of the day, they go home, they watch videos, they get on the internet. A lot of people don't get to go out and get into the field. We provide expeditions in southeast Oklahoma, and there's a lot of people that come. And when they come, we explain to them what you're going to experience, what you're going to see, what you're going to hear, and what you're going to learn is not what you see on TV. It's not what you see on the internet. It's not what you read in a book. I learned a long time ago that about the only way for you to experience the realness of it and find out that a lot of that stuff you're hearing on TV and in the books is not really true is just being in the field. And I had the opportunity a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, we thought, I think it was about 2012, we said, we're going to spend every weekend we can in the field. Every weekend. We spent 42 weekends out of the year out on our site and going to different locations.
Wow, that's
intense.
intense.
1 year I learned more than I did all these last 12 years or 11 years I've been doing this. So
just by being out there, by being out there in the field.
Yes. It is like anything. For you to become a master carpenter, what do you need to do? You need to start building stuff. You learn by trial and error what don't work and what works.
Yeah, and getting to that point where you're a master carpenter or an expert in field research and investigations with Sasquatch isn't always glamorous. So it's like you said, it's not what you're going to see on TV, but you've got to do it. And that's what interests me about what you're doing and the work you're doing with the Sasquatch Genome Project. And I believe you said they're out of Texas, right? A group of scientists there.
Yeah, the scientists are scattered all over, but the founder and Dr. Ketchum, she lives in East Texas, and that's, we say the Texas DNA, everybody kind of understands pretty much a lot of people in the Bigfoot area know about the DNA. Like, been on the internet, you talk about science, you're going to come across that project, and people will just name it the Texas DNA Project sometimes, or the Ketchum Project.
Well, what was interesting is that just a little while ago today on Twitter, we put a poll up on our site asking people whether or not they believe in Bigfoot. And a gentleman spoke up and basically said, no way, it's false, it's fairy tales. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said the problem that he has with it is because of the shady hoaxsters and the stuff that's not conclusive, the imprints in the sand that doesn't really say much, and the fuzzy pictures and the strange videos. And then I asked about the DNA, and his response was, what DNA? I've not heard of anything. And he said, if you have DNA that's leading us to some strong conclusions, why isn't that getting press? Why isn't it getting the proper attention? And I think that a lot of people just don't have any idea that this stuff is being done, that this research is there, that the science is there, and it's constantly being developed. developed. And by the way, the group of scientists and doctors and historians and people that are working on the Sasquatch Genome Project, their credentials aren't too shabby. So it's not like you're just taking a bunch of friends that like hanging out in the backyard and, hey, let's go hunting Bigfoot. There's some real stuff going on here. And yet it's not getting the attention in the media or even possibly in the scientific community that it deserves.
Well, I'll be honest with you, and I'll tell you the stuff you won't read, and I'll tell you the stuff that most people probably do know of, have heard rumors of, but yet a lot of people don't talk about it. Dr. Ketchum and the project in 2013 was pretty much steamrolling ahead and saying, all right, we've got it. We have a name. We have a scientific name, and we have the videos. It seemed like everywhere the project turned, there was a roadblock. Even in the people, the labs, and the different organizations that are involved doing the blind study, basically they're sent those samples. They don't know what they're testing, and that's the whole part of the blind study. So that way you're not being, I'm not going to send you a hair and go, hey man, you want to test this? I think it's Bigfoot. Well, Al Mackler right there is going to pretty much decide some of your fate in that testing, especially with, you're going to look at it and go, whatever. Well, the blind study, some of those labs would contact Dr. Ketchum and say, wait a minute, hey, look, you just found something. What is this? You just found a new species. This is humans. What is this? Well, some of them were like, do this more. Some of them said, thank you. Yes, you found something. Don't ever contact again. Some labs even contacted her and said, our legal department said that they don't want us involved anymore, and we refuse to, take our name out of everything. So it took the appearance, the further this went on, that there was some sort of maybe subsurface conspiracy or something. Something was trying to hold the project back. Of course, you have your naysayers. Well, you have other organizations, Bigfoot organizations, that also going to lose a lot if you have that DNA project come out and say, okay, we found it, we discovered it, end of story. They're alive, they're real. Now, those Bigfoot Research Organizations are losing a lot because some of those organizations are losing their financial support because the science is already there. No need to be doing any more research. So it's a competitive field. It's a very, very dark competitive field in referring to the proper phrase that some people use as a backstabbing. I'm lost for words here, but there was a lot of negative stuff towards the project, towards Dr. Ketchum. There was a lot of manufactured conspiracies against the project to try to discredit it before it came out. I saw a lot of people that I knew that were connected to the project that found it better to try to get money off the side of the project to gain a financial gain from it and then actually throw the project under the bus. It was and it still is sometimes, the project name just doesn't get good reviews with a lot of people.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, we can follow the money trail and figure out a lot of things where the research is concerned.
Right.
It sounds like, because you had also said earlier, and you talked a little bit last night about how a lot of people don't want to accept the truth, so they stop paying attention to it. There is a European version called the Woodwose, which is the wild man in Europe that I'm not sure I would call it well documented, but well illustrated and well spoken of in folklore. This guy is, he's very consistent throughout stories. They are very detailed in the fact that, down to the illustrations of the feet, to the fact that they always carry a specifically carved club in the left hand, not the right hand, even when the right hand is free. These illustrations throughout time for the Woodwose have always been very consistent. And in folklore, they are said to be the gap between fairies and pixies and to some extent demons and humanity, as if they were a hybrid between the two. So it sounds like what you're talking about, like what you had said earlier, some people don't want to consider the implications of that. And on the other side, you have the monetary and the business side that also blocks those implications. People not wanting to get into that for a business side, a business reason as well.
There is. And actually, that's a very good way to say it. The Bigfoot phenomenon, you have a financial, people that are trying to conduct a business off of Bigfoot. There's a store over in southeast Oklahoma, and they do nothing but Bigfoot in that store. Well, the owner of that store, his phrase is, Bigfoot is my business. there's a lot of people that try to gain monetary financial gain off of the Bigfoot. Like my Bigfoot expeditions, a lot of people will think that I'm doing it for the money. I'm making all kinds of money. Well, actually, to tell you the truth, part of that money goes back into our project for the school scholarships at our Bigfoot conference. Our Bigfoot conference is involved in school scholarship programs for the area schools. The other part of that money goes into the financial setup and operation of the expedition. So really, I'm not making any money off of it. You have another area. You have religion or spiritual matters. There's a lot of it in some things. A lot of people, especially in Native culture, it's a spiritual thing. Well, if you look at the DNA and you look at the DNA says it supports certain aspects of history and it refers to the support of certain areas of the Bible, then you're going to turn a lot of people off already, because a lot of people don't want to go into spiritual Christianity or religious conversations. Again, going back to that, I think what I said before about we are now such a cultural diversity, such a privacy type, don't hurt nobody's feelings society anymore, that, nobody wants to go about going that direction because they don't want to offend nobody, or they just don't want to talk about it.
You start talking about theology or the Bible or religion or anything like that, I mean, you might as well be talking about divisive politics. You'll shut down 3/4 of your listening audience just talking about that stuff.
Exactly, and like you said before, any type of hobby, culture, profession, churches, whatever, everybody, there's always a bad seed in something. No matter what you're doing in your job, sometimes everybody has a black sheep in the family. So we have a lot of black sheep in our family in the Bigfoot researcher community, and there's a lot of people that go out and do things to get media attention that causes everybody else that's doing the professional in the way that they believe is true to their heart get a black eye, because one individual goes out and does something silly, makes it on the internet, and it goes all over the world, and everybody says, yeah, Bigfoot researchers are a bunch of crazy people who aren't there looking for something that don't exist. So then we're automatically labeled.
I was reading actually before the interview tonight about a guy who had claimed to shoot a Bigfoot, which you had spoken a little bit about people who think that's the answer, is to go and find and kill one of these things, and that's probably not the best idea. But this guy had claimed to have shot a Bigfoot, and he then said that the body had been examined by several different labs, of which were undisclosed, and he actually went on 2 different tours showing off this body, and later admitted to having the body made as a prop. And I think it was reported that the second tour he made, he drew in $60,000 worth of profit or revenue or something like that just on the second tour alone. And I mean, how do you guys deal with that? How do you combat those images that are created in the media and due to the more unfortunate people out there doing this type of stuff?
Is that the one where he shot a female and then a child up in Northern California?
I believe so. I can pull it back up here in a second if you'd like, but it was pretty well documented. Give me just a second.
Yeah, and just going over exactly what your question is it's hard, because when people set out to do something, I'm sure that individual in the beginning thought he was doing something probably in his heart, that he said, okay, I'm going to prove it once and for all. It's standing right here in front of me. I've shot it. Well, everybody wants to have the answers of how is our world really built? Is the Bible correct? Is the earth 6 million years old, or is it 6,000 years old, or what is it? Everybody wants some of the answers to that. But then again, a lot of people also find the enjoyment in finding the truth and seeking it and trying to research it and trying to go down that road. The people that, like that individual that you're talking about, in the beginning, he probably thought he was doing something that was going to benefit everybody and benefit him, taking the monetary value in the mindset of going, we're going to make millions, such as these 2 individuals from Georgia that manufactured a body in a freezer, and then an individual from California contacted him, a well-known Bigfoot researcher, and said, hey, look, I know how to do this. We'll go on the website. People log on to the website. They're going to pay $2 to view the body. Well, as soon as it hit the air, as you imagine, my understanding is within the 24 or 42-hour time frame, they had already 2 million hits. So you take $2 times 2 million. Look how much money you got.
You're doing pretty well, yeah. I think Michael looked up. I think Michael looked up the one he was referencing. Michael, this is the one from San Antonio.
There are 2, and it's actually by the same guy. The first, I guess, occurrence took place with him in Georgia, and the second was in Texas. but I guess this happened twice.
That is the same individual that I'm talking about. That was the two individuals in Georgia. It is the same gentleman. The San Antonio situation I can actually talk about because when I was in 2010, when I was still working for the government, I was traveling to San Antonio to the Brooks Army Hospital and Fort Sam Houston, and I was giving classes down there. I knew the police chief at those times in one of the communities there, and he had contacted me and said, hey, he knew I was involved in the Bigfoot stuff. He said, you know that they just had a 911 call of a Bigfoot crossing the highway here in San Antonio. And I was like, what? Well, the news channel.
Crossing the highway. The police chief has got the Bigfoot crossing the highway call.
Yes. There was a homeless person that basically saw a Bigfoot run across the highway, I guess, picked up a deer and ran across the highway. Well, she dialed 911. And it was a big, huge mess because they're trying to figure out why did a homeless person have how they have a cell phone. Well, you can have a cell phone and actually have no data and no minutes and still dial 911 on it. Well, come to find out, there was some witnesses down there that actually saw something cross the highway. Well, this individual that you're talking about took that as an opportunity to travel to San Antonio to see if he can capture and shoot one. There's actually even a video documentary on that event. If you watch it, I'm not going to say anything bad about somebody, probably a really nice guy, but you can pretty much tell right then and there the money spent and the quality of that documentary was probably better spent on something else, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, basically, that right there damages the credibility of everybody else because then most of the people that sit in their homes, watch Bigfoot shows, get an interest in it, they go on the internet. Very few of them are the people that actually live in the rural areas, that live out in the mountains, that live out in the areas of where these activities happen. Well, the people that live out in those areas where it's very active, live out in a rural home or a farm, they're not going to be very vocal about it. They're not going to be very advertising of it because they don't want people running around all over the property. So they're going to be very quiet. You get all these people who live mainly in your urban areas, in your cities, that have that interest and want to go out into the wilderness. Well, you kind of see where I'm going. You kind of have two different types of people that are involved in this.
Yeah, I got you.
I'm not saying the people in the rural areas are not involved. They're highly involved because I talk to quite a bit of them all the time. Matter of fact, the location where I went just recently, most of those are rural people, but they're explaining to me they don't want a lot of people on their land. So you have the people that sit at home. It is a hobby. They may go out maybe once, twice a year. The rest of their time is spent on the internet and watching shows. When they see one of these documentaries or they see one of these stories about Bigfoot researchers fabricating a hoax, and then the next one, and then the next one, then all of a sudden everybody's labeled in the Bigfoot research world that we're just another hoax.
I would imagine it does get tiring, and in my mind, I'm trying to sit here and think, we're the monster guys. We get excited about this type of stuff ourselves. We want to know more constantly, and it's why we do what we do. But I would imagine if I were out there just living on my own property and experienced this often enough that it wouldn't be quite as fantastic or exciting, and it becomes just another matter of fact. So I can definitely see why at some point it's just like you get the city slicker that comes in and it's just like obviously they're here, go move on about your business. It's not any crazy news to them.
We're at a place in time in history where ultimately there are a lot of people who want their 15 minutes of YouTube fame and have fun creating hoaxes. It's going to be increasingly more difficult to overcome that segment of society that wants to play the hoax, coupled with Hollywood or whoever else is out there that wants to, sensationalize everything for the next commercial, and then further couple that with the money trail that puts up the roadblocks within the scientific community. Are we going to be able to overcome all this at some point and bring some definitive evidence, some concrete answers, or are we always going to be in this place going forward that we're just going to have to keep searching and realize that at least in North America, we're always going to run into these roadblocks? How do you foresee that playing out?
I think we are going to continue to have the roadblocks. I think we're going to continue. One of the things that I'm doing, of course, I'm a grain of a sand in a bucket in the middle of a field, which is in the middle of the ocean. We run expeditions. We advertise, but we don't go all out in our advertising. Mainly, a lot of ours is done by the word of mouth. When we start out with, 50, 60 people each year, and then those 50, 60 people the following year become 150 people, and then it keeps building. When they come on the expeditions and they're getting to have these encounters, they get to have sightings, get to have this interaction, and say, "Hey, look, man, you gotta capitalize on this." And I had one gentleman that his wife was an advertisement in sports outdoor gear, and I said, "Well, I'm not really trying to make this big. I'm not trying to have 50, 60 people on these expeditions. I'm doing 5 or 6 people, keeping them low, keeping them small. They're going to have their own interactions. I'm having 7 or 8 trips a year, and we're just keeping it. It's an educational. I'm traveling around different parts of Oklahoma and Texas doing these town hall meetings and doing these, public education, similar to like how you and I are talking, and presenting the evidence, presenting the scientific, and we're making that more of that awareness, getting that word out there. It's slow, but we're taking our time and we're doing it correctly and we're doing it respectfully. You have organizations that do Bigfoot expeditions all over the country. A lot of those are money makers. I've been on those. I used to run those years ago, and I know people that have been on my expeditions that have attended those expeditions. And the only difference is we're kind of doing the one-on-one. We're not in it to make money. We're in it to help educate people to say, look, this is real. They are out there, and this is how we've had the interactions, and what we're doing is showing you how we've come to do it. But we're also teaching people not to go out and start looking for them, because that's not going to gain anything. It's kind of a sensitive process. I'm trying to teach people how to have their own areas, because a lot of people come on expeditions that live in a country that have activity going on, but they don't know what to do with it. So they'll come on one of our trips so we can explain to them, this is what we've learned, this is what we've seen, and this is what we've been doing. We're not saying this is the correct way, but this is how we've been doing it. This is the positive outcome we've had with these.
And it's very...
Your question, I just say, to answer your question again at the end, I just don't see us going anywhere with this. You've seen where the DNA and the proof is setting. It's setting in the internet. You only hear about it when you find it or hear about it from somebody else. It's not going anywhere. It's not gaining any momentum. And to tell you the truth, at this moment, I'm kind of okay with that, because looking at how people are, and looking at the number of people who are out trying to shoot one, they're out trying to think that a body is going to solve the problem, and the problems that these people are having, the people that have shot them, homeowners defending themselves, defending their property, or people going out, such as this other gentleman that claims he did. Most people have had these encounters where they've shot at one or shot one. They've all ended negative, to the point that if you talk to them now, they're going to say they wish they never pulled the trigger.
Yeah. Well, and I want to...
It never turns out good.
Yeah, I can see where that turns out to be a catastrophe, or at least a really bad experience for a lot of people. I want to step back and talk about your expeditions, because, for one, it's just fascinating to me. And Michael and I have done, research, not on that scale, for other creatures and folklore and mythology that we've done throughout the years. And I could talk about personal experience on some stuff growing up that is fascinating and interesting. So the idea of going out in the field and being in the midst of this experience, immersed in this environment, is something I'm very interested in. And you sent me some pictures and some videos, some notes from some of your expeditions. I'd like to throw some questions to you on that, because you had some really interesting notes about some of those expeditions. Most recently, I think as recent as October, you guys went out, you had a small group go out, and you had some very real experiences out there in the field, to the extent that you had rocks thrown at you at your campsite. And if I'm not mistaken, one of your notes talked about how the Sasquatch would charge individuals, or they would charge the group and come pretty close to them, but then kind of move off to the side and out of view and not engage. What can you tell us about those experiences and the behavior of Sasquatch while you're out there in those field experiences?
Well, the location where we go, these locations that we have actually been going for years. Matter of fact, some of these locations, I was doing the BFRO expeditions back in the day. These are the locations where we had picked to have our expedition site. Well, that was in 2005 or 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. So imagine the years are going by. Those sites I'm still picking people to. So if you think about it for just a second, step up and just think off for a second that you are dealing with something that's similar to us. Imagine it has emotions. Imagine it has a thought process. It feels pain. It sees, it has its own family. It's got little ones, big ones, tall ones. If I come to that site all these years, I'm bringing, 4 or 5 people here, 7 or 8 people here, 7 or 8 times a year, and then I'm going on my own sometimes, just with me and a couple of the friends, and we're going outside of those trips. And we're saying 16, 17 times a year maybe we're going to these locations. Imagine a relationship's probably being built. They know we're not there to harm them. I know that they're not going to do anything to us because it's a 2016 and I'm still standing abandoned. I'm still here. Nothing's happened.
That says something.
Yeah, take that for just a second. Now, if they're smart as I think I know they are, they're seeing me bring different people each time. There is an interaction, I think, that they're seeing from us that we are bringing people for them to see, and for those people we're bringing to get a glimpse of them and see that interaction and see that no, they're not scary. Now, that's not saying that they're not all the same, but right here at this location where we're at, we've been going for years. So apparently we've built a relationship of some sort. We're not charging at them. We're not shining flashlights. We're not pointing lasers. We're not trying to capture videos. We only go in there with clothes on our back, riding our four-wheelers. People can bring night vision. They can bring audio recorders. They can bring whatever they want. We stress, please do not shine flashlights, because that causes the activity pretty much just go quiet the rest of the night. Well, October, myself and another gentleman, and most of my activity is grunts. You can hear them talking, see somebody shine, you hear some branches snap, you have a rock land at your feet, and that might push a tree over, you might hear them whistle, you might hear them do an owl call, and that's about, anything. You see them cross the trail. Sometimes they'll 15, 20 yards away, you'll see them dart across the trail real quick. You'll see a shadow. Well, this particular time, one came stomping towards us and got within, I don't know exactly how far, but not very far, and turned and went and paralleled us to the right. Some people call that a bluff charge. Well, in my opinion, obviously he wasn't doing that, or she was doing that to scare us off, because we've been in there for hours, and they did it again later in the night. Well, but they continued to whistle. You could hear them talking back in there. One was making a cat noise. I don't think there was a cat down in there, a house cat noise, and then you have alcohol. So I didn't refer to that as a negative thing, that the thing charged. But at the same time, if you were in a law enforcement situation, I can't prove what charged through the woods at us. The gentleman who was with me thought, well, maybe it was a deer, and I thought, well, we've been in here for a couple hours. We've rolled our four-wheelers, we've been down in here, we've made a fire, we've been talking and walking around the woods. I don't think a deer is down in here. Plus, it was extremely heavy and it was bipedal. But you really couldn't see exactly what it was. So if I were to go into court of law, I can't tell you that was a Bigfoot charge, but I can tell you whatever it was bigger than me, and they could see through the dark a whole lot better than I could, and I could not see it.
I mean, these are obviously fascinating experiences for anybody who goes into that environment on your expeditions. At what point have you ever feared for your life? Have you ever felt like you were in danger, or maybe somebody in your group has crossed a line and maybe misread the communication that's coming from whatever was out there, and that you were in harm's way? And obviously with the size and the strength of this Sasquatch, this race of people, or this creature as somebody would call it, they could obviously do some great damage. Have you ever felt in harm's way, or felt like we've crossed a line, we're doing the wrong thing, we need to get out of here?
The only time that I've ever had that happen was we were on a BFRO expedition, I think in 2006, and we were up in the southeast area in the town of Honobia, southeast, way back up on what now is a private lease, about 9 miles back in the wilderness. We had a faith camp set up, and we had a young lady she was going to stay there by herself, but we had walked on down the road a little ways, and everybody else was about a mile down the road, set up in a small makeshift base camp. Well, one immediately came up behind her. She got scared. She pretty much almost froze stiff because she was scared. Well, the other boy and I ran back down there. Long story short, we got to her. We were getting to leave. We can hear the vehicle come down the road. I stepped away, and then all the excitement to take a nature break. And before I even got to that, a pair of red eyes pretty much illuminated in front of me, not very far, maybe about 30 feet, maybe, because we went back in the daytime to look at the distance and how tall it was. But those red eyes, and just the feeling, the nonverbal communication that I got of whatever you want to call it, it pretty much told me that we did not belong there and we needed to leave. That's the only time I've ever had that happen. Most of everything else I've had the experience has pretty much always been positive in my mind, but my approach may be a little bit different towards everybody. And again, we just don't go in there with a bunch of flashlights and start shining on flashlights and night vision and thermals everywhere. We pretty much try not to be the intrusive part. We pretty much go to a spot, stop, and let them come to us. And that's about the only way. Yeah,
and my question about that moment where you felt like you were in danger, possibly, I wondered, did you have a flashlight? Is that how you saw the red eyes, or were these red eyes that were just coming from a natural source with no illumination on them?
We were so far down in the pine forest, and it was there was no moon, It was illuminating. That's the first time. That was about 2006. That was the first time I actually saw eyes. It was really, okay, here's the picture. It was dark, a mass of darkness. I heard a low rumble. When I turned to raise my head to look up, two pair of eyes went from a blackness to illuminating bright red, and then they went back. I was so close. I could see the iris. I could see his outline of his iris in his eye, or she, I don't know. Well, I immediately turned and walked back over to where they were standing. I said, we got to go. That was the beginning in my mind that this was something more than, they're more than just, I was like, no, they're not an ape. They're not a monkey. There's way more to this. And
I've even read in some reports that they have or have developed, and this kind of gets into a little woo-woo for some people, but
Right.
I've read that they have telepathic abilities to communicate with humans and send those warnings or communicate somehow, possibly on a level of auditory sound that is below human hearing. Am I correct? Am I accurate in saying any of that?
Yes, yes. We basically hear at 2 megahertz. There has been, back in the BFRO days, one gentleman actually manufactured a device that would pick up infrasound, that would record infrasound. And even in my own research, when I was playing around with parabolic listening devices, when we would start to hear noises, verbalization, and we said, hey, something's over here. It's funny, when you point your recorder or point your parabolic in that direction, you get some sort of interference in that recorder and in that parabolic mic. Thinking back in the days when we were operating those infrasound recorders, you're recording sounds below our hearing, which is 2 megahertz. Scott Nelson is a retired naval cryptolinguist that has done some study on the language. He's been a speaker at our Bigfoot conference for a number of years. He and I have had, private conversations together, and it is believed in the Bigfoot researcher community, and in my belief, that their language, when they speak so fast. When you record their sound, when you record what you think is a grunt, it sounds like a, but when you slow it down below our hearing and slow that sucker down in some software, you can hear the words. You can hear the mocha, boca, bola, you can hear the verbalization.
Wow.
So sometimes people think that you're a grunt or a growl. It's actually language being spoken, but it's just spoken so fast that, it's the same with if you were to go to, if you were to listen or you're a Spanish speaker and you live in Mexico and you go to Puerto Rico. Well, Puerto Rico, the Spanish that spoke there is so fast, it's hard for you in a native speaker of Spanish in Mexico to understand some of the words they're speaking in Puerto Rico because they speak so fast.
Yeah, it's almost as if, I don't know if I can communicate this clearly. This is just a thought that's coming to me. It's almost as if Sasquatch looks as though it were an ancient creature or a prehistoric beast that doesn't have a lot of intelligence. Just like their language, if you hear it, it seems like it's just a grunt. But what's the possibility that they are actually much more advanced, much more intelligent, and their communication is much more refined, but we can't see that and we can't hear it through the lens that we see and hear through. But this is actually a very intelligent species, a very advanced civilization, and I don't know, maybe it's why we can't find them very often and bring that concrete evidence.
Maybe this will help. I had an elder tell me one time, they are smart enough, they know what a computer is, but they could care less how a computer works. They don't need that computer. They're non-materialistic. They live in a world that basically they have everything they need. They have food, they have water, and they have shelter. As long as they have food, as long as they have those three things, they can exist. They can live next to a major metropolitan, or they can live in the most remote mountains of the world. They're found in all parts of the world, close to major cities and out in the middle of nowhere. The time frame, from what I understand, is at one time the Indian used to communicate with the Bigfoot. They used to trade with the Bigfoot. But when colonization came, the Europeans came over, and things started to change for the Indian. Religion started coming in, materialistic things. The man had to have this to make his life easier, had to have that. That's my understanding. That's when that communication broke. And the Bigfoot stayed in their own world, and we existed in ours. I think the reason why a lot of people have a hard time accepting it is because we are taught we are the alpha males. We run everything, just as it says in the Bible that we had control over the animals, we had control over the beasts of the earth. We continue to have that mentality. Well, this is something that does not have someone control it. It controls them. They control themselves. And I think our mindset as humans causes us not to believe that there's something else out there that's bigger than us, that can survive outside of us, that has a language that's generational, that has children, that can do their own thing, that is much more powerful, that can move through the woods quieter than we are and survive outside of us. And we live in our homes and our cars and our air conditioning, and we just can't, our brains, we can't comprehend that there's something out there that survives like that.
Now, to take it back a step for just a second, and some of that, I think, lines up with this as well. It's interesting that you mentioned the infrasound subject. It's something that I've actually been looking into very lightly recently. Infrasound itself is interesting at first glance, but at second glance, it's actually kind of terrifying. It can cause nausea, headaches. Some even go so far as to study it, and I guess there's argument whether or not it can cause hallucinations. A lot of people have been said to experience the phenomenon of shadow people when it's present. So it makes sense, and if what you're saying is true, that they can produce such an effect, that is a little scary to think about.
It is, and there has been encounters where people have what they refer to as being zapped. That incident I told you where the red eyes on the BFRO expedition, the young lady experienced something that is similar to exactly what that was, because when we reached her, she was very athletic, so she was in very good condition. But her heart rate was above 100. Her pupils, you think in the dark, okay, we're in the dark. Your pupils are going to be dilated, correct? So they can be opened up to see.
Right.
Her pupils were constricted. Her heart rate, again, was over 100, and she could not move. When you touched her, she was like a brick wall. And she felt like she was her back was numb, and from her legs down, she could not move. Her fight or flight was non-existent. I've never experienced that. I've known some people in all these last, 6-7 years on these expeditions. We've never had anybody on our trips that have ever experienced it. We've had some people that know what it is. I've talked to a few people here lately that's had some experiences that said that they had that feeling and asked me if it was infrasound, and I said, well, I couldn't tell you. Maybe more research ought to be done, but it's very likely, in my opinion, when you're dealing with these, with the tall people, the Bigfoot, anything is possible. I mean, you just cannot have a box. Everything is open. And there's so much that goes on with this. And, you can say flesh and blood, but a lot of times the woo it sneaks in and penetrates it because you just can't get away from it. If you have 3 reports, 2 reports sometimes are going to have the woo. And that one report's just going to stay as it is.
Right.
Then your next 3, 1 has a woo and the other 2 don't. It's kind of hard not to get away from it, but you can't be in a box. Everything's open with this.
Tell me about some of the other behavior. That's some of the notes from your expeditions, people feeling like, or you guys seeing that you were being charged by something, and you even made mention that you couldn't definitively say what it is, but there have been other moments throughout the years where you've definitely seen what you've seen. You were talking to me last night about even in broad daylight, these things are being comfortable enough and perhaps curious enough to show themselves to groups of people that they feel comfortable with. There are some other instances, and I think in some of the reading material you sent me, where people who are living in rural areas had the experience of Bigfoot coming up on their porches, knocking on their windows and doors, throwing rocks at their houses or throwing rocks at them in campsites. That seems to be a common theme, that either there's a real curiosity, or they're toying with us, or there's warning signals going out. What about some of that behavior?
And that's one of the things that I've been researching is the activity, but not merely the activity. It's more of what the person's doing. What are they doing that this activity is being seen? Well, like in our situation, going back to your first comment about the being seen in the daytime, this one area where we take people, we usually try to get everybody out there in the daytime so they can kind of see the area, get acclimated to the surroundings, so they know where the tree stumps are, where the trees are, the big rocks and everything, so when they see it at night, they're not saying, hey, what is that? Big lump, a bunch of rocks. I knew, because of being at this location for so long, that their travel paths usually crossed this timber road. And I told these 2 brothers, I said, well, stay right here. watch that road, look all the way down. You had probably about a 200-yard observation area down this timber road. And we weren't there probably 10 minutes, and they both jumped out of their chairs and jumped up and said, one just crossed the road. And I turned to look back down the road, and you can see the tree limb moving. There was no wind. It was still as night, no moon. Later, it got dark, and then you could just see them cross the road. You just see the big, huge, dark shadows moving back and forth across the road. The locations were houses, farms, rural settings, where people are seeing them. I can only imagine that a lot of these areas where we find out there's a lot of timber being cut off in different directions. Well, maybe the encroachment of their habitat is being lost due to timber. Cities are getting bigger. Rural areas are getting more. People are moving out from the city, moving into the rural areas where houses are being built. In my opinion, the last 4 years, I've seen a huge increase of activity in rural areas in different parts of Oklahoma. Even where I'm at, I have people that sometimes know that I'm involved in this. They'll come up to me on the side and say, hey, I heard something. Oh, Farmer John just saw something. And then the next week, somebody else has said somebody else saw something. The sightings, in my opinion, are increasing. Encounters with people living in the rural areas. A couple homes up in northern Oklahoma are experiencing a lot of activity where the side of the house will be slapped. They'll have rocks thrown up on the roof. Something heavy is walking across the porch or the deck of the house. They see huge shadows next to the window where the window is set on the second floor. And you can imagine if it's on the second floor, how is something walking by the window? You can imagine the height of that.
Listen, Troy, you just messed with Michael's mind. Big time right there. He has a genuine fear of things in the window, and he's sitting here about to come unglued.
Well, the fact that DC keeps on tapping me on the shoulder doesn't help.
And I keep pointing at the windows that there's something out there. He's just freaking out a little bit right now.
Well, and that's another thing that we've done. We've had a couple that came on one of our expeditions here recently that has that. They have that. They just moved to a very rural area of southeast Oklahoma, and they've had some encounters. And the husband is a little leery because of that situation. Well, it's the fear of the unknown. Again, you as a man are taught you're the alpha male. There's nothing out there bigger than you. Well, there is stuff out there bigger than you, but the thing of it is, if you show it respect, they'll show you respect. Even in my mind, I know that sometimes that not all these are good. They're just like we are. They're going to have a bad apple in their group too. But if they're coming around you, if they're coming around your house, they're either inquisitive of what you have, they're even passing through. You live in an area where they may travel from point A to point B across your property all the time because, not all of us are up at 2 o'clock in the morning every single night. So we don't know what roams around our property. We always hear the dogs barking, but we don't know what they're barking at. So it's one of those, you don't really want to get up and go look at the window. And I'll tell you, and I'll be honest, when I stay at some of the cabins and some of the locations where I'm at, sometimes I close the curtains all the way and turn the porch lights and turn everything off so I can go to sleep because I know they're going to be out there roaming around. But I want to get some sleep, and I know they're going to be out there.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the way we've done it for so many years, just in my area, if you show them respect, they're going to show you respect. Now, they're still going to be, inquisitive and be interested in what you're doing too.
Let me switch gears, and I'm just going to say, for the sake of our conversation right now, that this may or may not make the recorded interview, but I want to ask you again something we talked about last night. This is something for a lot of people that really goes outside the bounds of woo-woo and, spirituality and that kind of stuff, but I think this topic is increasing in people's conversation. There's a high level of interest and a high level of fear of activity among what many would consider supernatural entities in our world. I will say, for the sake of conversation, that there have been some connections made between the likes of Bigfoot and Sasquatch and other creatures, other species, other entities, what some would call historical accounts or biblical accounts of things like the Nephilim and angelic activity or demonic activity. Is there any connection anywhere with Sasquatch and all of this? Because some of what you've described in behavior and experiences matches up with some of that. I'm of the opinion, regardless of what lands in reality versus folklore, I'm of the opinion that we don't have a clue about everything that's out there. We don't have a full understanding of everything that's in nature, whether on land or in the ocean. Is there any connection to these stories, these ancient stories, the biblical text? I know that some Native American tribes have these stories and these traditions among them. Is there any connection between all of that and Bigfoot?
Yes, I truly believe that. Most of everything I've heard, even in the beginning of learning all this from the tribal point of view, everything I've heard and everything I'm reading, even trying to be careful with what you're reading on the internet, because sometimes you don't know what that source is putting that on the internet. But what you're finding is a common thread that just about everybody is saying that they were here before us. They were here before them. A lot of people refer to them as the ancient ones. The Apache Indian, they refer to them as the ancient ones in some of their literature, in some of their folklore. I know some old-timers I've talked to refer to them as the old one, big brother, elder brother. Regardless of who or what they come from, and this is what I explain to people that when they're on our expeditions and they see their eyes, they see the eye shiner, like, well, how can that be? We're deep down in this gully, deep down. We have a foliage, we have a tree canopy that there's no light penetrating it. It's so dark you can't see the hand. How does our eyes do that? My explanation is I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know this world. I just think that whatever they are, if the science is right, if the DNA is correct, if they are a product of the Nephilim, but of course these would not be the angels, they would be a product of that time frame. They would be descendants. They could carry that angelic DNA. They could carry those abilities that those angels had. They could carry the woo, as as a lot of people refer to it as, which gives them those abilities to do those certain things.
Now, my question, thinking about it, for just if we do include this in the podcast, for the audience that is curious about the Nephilim would be products of angels, specifically fallen angels and humans, and it would line up in some areas to what we're talking about tonight. My question is, if it is from a fallen angel, so to speak, given what we're talking about could potentially be from a product of humans and fallen angels specifically, you had mentioned earlier that they have, you believe that some of them are respectful of us and if we're respectful of them, but you had said something that, they have their bad apples as well. How does that play out? If you were looking at it from that possibility of that angle, how are they not all bad apples, so to speak? How would they have any good apples? That's
a good question, and we have discussed that a lot, and I've discussed that a lot with Dr. Ketchum. She's seen the DNA, and she's had some field experiences, and it is true. You have to be very careful, but that's why these locations where we take the expedition, we've been going for so long, and I think we've adapted to a situation where they're basically, according to legend, that they have free will just like we do. So they have a choice, and if you have some that are very remote, and that's how they were born and raised, and I'm sure if they teach each other to stay away from us, that's how you get your bad apples. They stay away from us. We start encroaching. We build a house in an area. All of a sudden, we're on their space. We're on their land. So that's where you might have those situations where the house is getting rocked every night. Chickens are being stolen.
So there is a real potential. I think it's interesting that I catch myself while we're talking about Bigfoot through this entire conversation, that we're not talking about just a monster, but we're not just talking about another creature. We're talking about a race of people, tribes of people all over the world. It's kind of foreign for me to sit here and talk about Bigfoot, talk about Sasquatch as another person.
It is.
And yet there's that very real possibility that that's what we're talking about. In the same breath, it gets even weirder when we start talking about them being descendants of a whole nother race beyond this world. Really, in the scope of history, we're just in a speck of time where we're just beginning to interact with them. And it's just a fascinating thing to think about. It's kind of blowing my mind. It's kind of like trying to figure out eternity, forever, and trying to put a boundary on that. It just can't happen. It just kind of blows your mind sitting here talking about this.
Well, you talk about them encroaching now, or us encroaching on them now, but, even going back to the Woodwoes that we were talking about earlier, the European wild man, they had talked about, there was a Latin passage talking about him, and it referred to him in association with satyrs and fauns. So if you think about it, if I don't know, this is kind of hard to wrap my mind around sometimes, but they're not necessarily so new, and it's not necessarily that we're just now getting to know them. It's almost a reemergence. It's coming back to the forefront.
Right.
Well, Troy, we've taken up quite a bit of your time this evening, and we really appreciate you spending some time with us talking about this. I would love to have you back on the show and maybe some of your colleagues in the future, but you've really opened up some really great information for us to think about and for our listeners to think about, and it's just been a privilege and an honor to talk to you tonight. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate it, and thank you.
Absolutely. Last night you invited us potentially to join you on an expedition or an investigation.
Yes.
I really look forward to that, and just getting a chance to meet you and shake your hand. Until then, Thank you so much, and if there's anything we can do for you, let us know.
It was definitely a pleasure.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to the Monster Guys podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment and leave a positive review on iTunes, and then continue the conversation on Twitter or Facebook at The Monster Guys. For more information about DC's and Michael's books, appearances, or upcoming events, please visit themonsterguys.com, where you can also find show notes and catch up on past episodes. If you are experiencing a warm feeling of kindness and generosity, please consider supporting the Monster Guys efforts on Patreon. That's patreon.com/The Monster Guys. Your support is appreciated and helps DC and Michael continue to bring even more great content about monsters, mythology, and folklore. We're only getting better, and it's because of you. Thank you.